the three most commonly denied aircraft insurance claims. We call them the three Ps often, and that is violating the pilot requirements, the policy's stated approved use, so the use of the aircraft, and then third being the covered policy territory.
Welcome to the Aviation Insurance Podcast, the podcast that helps aircraft owners and aviation businesses learn and understand the complex world of aviation insurance and risk management. From the basic principles of aviation insurance to risk management techniques and updates on the aviation insurance market, the Aviation Insurance Podcast is your guide to traverse the world of aviation insurance. Now, here's your host, Tim Bonnell.
Well, welcome to the Aviation Insurance Podcast, and I want to bring you a solo episode today to talk about a very important topic, and that is special and important issues to think about, to consider, and to address relating to insuring turbine aircraft. Turbine aircraft are high-powered, they can go long distances, and so it's really important to keep in mind how to address the risks and issues pertinent to turbine aircraft operations. And so stay tuned. We got some really important things to keep in mind. And with that, I'll get right into the first thing to keep in mind. And really the first three things all relate to the three most commonly denied aircraft insurance claims. We call them the three Ps often, and that is violating the pilot requirements, the policy's stated approved use, so the use of the aircraft, and then third being the covered policy territory. And then we'll get into other specialized turbine issues that need to be addressed. So first, the pilot requirements. Number one, it's always critical to ensure that any pilot operating the aircraft addresses, meets, or exceeds the pilot requirements stated in the aircraft insurance policy. A lot of people think if they meet FAA requirements, then they're fine to fly the aircraft. And from an FAA standard, that's fine, but the insurance company whose money is on the line may have a different set of standards, and so we have to be sure that those pilot requirements are met. So that pilot either needs to be named specifically to the policy as an approved pilot, which is what's typically preferred and a standard for a pilot who normally operates the aircraft. And if it's an occasional user, most pilots will have some form of an open pilot warranty, also called an open pilot clause, which is a set of requirements that says if a pilot meets or exceeds these requirements, they may operate the aircraft, and the insurance policy will still apply, subject to its terms and conditions. So it's very important that the pilot meets the insurance requirements of the policy, not just the FAA requirements. Second, not just the experience qualifications, but most turbine aircraft have additional training requirements, and those are very specific in the policy. Those could include it being a simulator-based trainer, so the annual recurrent training, ground and flight in a simulator-based training at a formal training school. Oftentimes, regardless of if it's simulator or in aircraft, it will have to be at a training facility approved by the insurance company, and typically it will state a time frame. Very often, it's a 12-month time frame. Now, 12 months can be stated a couple different ways. It could be stated in the last 12 calendar months, which means you have the calendar month that you last trained to get through, and others will say in the 12 months preceding the flight. So the last training certificate would have to be dated within the 12 preceding months of the intended flight. So getting outside of those pilot requirements is one of the most frequent ways aircraft insurance are denied. So ensure not only is the pilot either named or meet the qualifications of the open pilot warranty, but also that they meet the full pilot training requirements outlined in the insurance policy. They vary from insurance company to insurance company, so it's very important to read the specific wording to be sure that pilots meet the requirements outlined in the insurance policy. So the second P is the policy use. All right, so each policy will state it's covered for certain operations. That could be pleasure and business use, which typically is pleasure and incidental business travel where no charge is made. Sometimes that use will outline some specific reimbursements that are allowed. Sometimes it won't, but it's not always the same as the FAA requirements. Some people says the FAA allows me to reimburse for this. But again, the FAA is not the same as the insurance company. The insurance company has money on the line, so they may have a different set of requirements to qualify the coverage for the insurance policies. It's important that the use is very well read and understood. Another use might be called industrial aid or corporate use. That's basically pleasure and business use with professional pilots. Typically, professional pilots get a little bit lower rates than owner pilots, and so that's the case. It's very important that it's used with professional pilots. Insurance policies are conditional on the representations made in the application or by the insured to the insurance company. So if they are told that it's all professional pilots and there's really owner pilots on it, that could invalidate the insurance contract or the insurance clause. So it's important that the use is very clear. Other uses would include commercial or charter and so on and so forth. So you want to ensure that you're using it for the intended use. One area where this is becoming a bigger challenge is when dry lease or other leases are involved. We're seeing more and more leases in the insurance industry, and more of the insurance company underwriters are working to restrict that exposure due to the additional limits of liability that they're exposed to. Many of them will allow a certain amount, let's say 3 to 5 on average, depends on the insurance company, but they're starting to charge an additional fee or additional premium for each one of those dry leases. So if your use is pleasure and business use, or it is even industrial aid use applicable to the named insured, anytime you enter a dry lease to a third party, that introduces a new use. And so that needs to be addressed. That's where working, communicating with the aviation insurance broker is very important, making sure that an aviation knowledgeable and experienced attorney is involved to ensure that the dry lease doesn't violate the FAA rules for charter, which is becoming a greater problem. And that's an FAA issue. But at the end of the day, make sure that the operations of the aircraft qualify under the approved use, the policy use on the aircraft insurance policy. So the first P was making sure that all pilots meet all of the pilot requirements in the policy. The second was the purpose of use. The second is the policy territory. Each aircraft insurance policy states a policy covered territory or coverage territory where operations are approved. For turbine aircraft, this becomes very important, especially when operating outside of the United States. Some policies will state that the coverage applies worldwide, and that's great. It's worldwide. However, no insurance company can violate a statute or a law. So this comes into play when, especially when a particular location is on the sanction list of the OFAC SDN list, the Office of Foreign Asset Control. If you're flying into a sanctioned country, your policy cannot be adjusted, handled, or anything done to provide coverage for the aircraft when it is in or operated in or around a OFAC sanctioned country. So worldwide still always has limitation because an insurer can't violate the law, and doing any type of business claims adjusting in an OFAC sanctioned company would violate the law. So worldwide means worldwide except those countries that would violate the law. Some of them, though, may include certain islands of the Caribbean, but not all. So it's just very important when you're operating outside of the country to know that coverage territory is stated correctly in the policy as to where the aircraft is going to operate. On that note, when you're operating outside of the United States, there are regularly, I should say, requirements that need to be addressed. And flying in or over the European Union, there are specific minimum limits of liability, war risk requirements, coverage requirements that they state. And so those have to be met. It's that those requirements are based on the aircraft's maximum takeoff weight and a few other factors. And so anytime we're flying in over the European Union, that has to be addressed. If you're flying into Mexico, the Mexican government requires a Mexican liability certificate. So it's important to have that. And I always encourage people, if you're flying anywhere near Mexico where you may have to have an emergency landing for whatever reason in Mexico, to make sure you have a Mexican liability policy on board. And those typically can be arranged either directly with your current aviation insurance carrier, or your aviation insurance broker has other sources for this coverage. If you're bringing, charter passengers or cargo in and out of Canada, they require a customs bond. And then there are, of course, other countries that do have some specific coverage requirements. So be sure when operating internationally that those are addressed. And again, those are the requirements of countries you're flying into, not just the insurance policy. So at Aris Insurance Solutions, our customers tell us that they work with us because we are responsive, we get back to them quickly, we're reliable to get the job done and follow through with what they've asked us to do. We communicate effectively so they always know what we're doing, we anticipate their needs so that they don't have to think of everything they need in their aviation insurance program. And this and many more reasons are why people work with Aris Insurance Solutions. To learn how you can contact and work with Aris Insurance Solutions, click in the link below for all that information. I will mention, I just mentioned war risk and allied perils. There is a list of exclusions in every aircraft insurance policy, every aviation commercial general liability policy called the war risk and allied perils exclusion. These include things like hijacking, malicious acts of sabotage, nuclear detonation, and so on and so forth. It also includes things like insurrection, riots, but one of the biggest things that exclusion includes is confiscation. Now, in the aviation insurance industry, we frequently say that if you're traveling outside the country, you really should carry war risk, at least for the physical damage on the aircraft for this confiscation purpose. But we've seen aircraft many times confiscated in the United States. So I'm always a proponent of any aircraft owner operator carrying war risk, at least physical damage coverage, if not liability, because aircraft do get confiscated in the U.S. when there was no reason to suspect otherwise from the aircraft operator. They may have a passenger that they didn't realize may be potentially an illegal alien. We have seen attempted hijackings on Cessna Skyhawks doing flight training, for instance. So war risk and allied perils limited right back is an option that you can purchase to buy back most of those war risk exclusions other than the nuclear type of risks. So it's always encouraged on a turbine aircraft, definitely when flying outside of the country, but certainly it's a valuable coverage to consider inside the country as well. To get the war risk and allied perils right back coverage, you can buy it back for the physical damage and the liability and or one or the other. And that coverage is really ultimately insured or reinsured in a different market, but provided through your standard aircraft insurance policy. And this one area has seen rates increase in a number of years, in the last several years, I should say, partly due to the confiscation of the Russian aircraft last year, and a number of other reasons. But war risk and allied perils, it's important coverage to consider, certainly when you're flying outside the country, but definitely inside, while you're making sure that those countries you fly to are approved on your insurance policy and or don't violate OFAC-sanctioned countries. So pilot requirements being met, the policy use being correct for your operations, and the policy territory and all the other requirements being carried are very important when operating turbine aircraft. Now, there's a few other areas that are very special to or specific to turbine aircraft that don't apply to piston aircraft, and it has to do with the engine. Aircraft insurance policies, any claims have to be triggered by an occurrence. An occurrence is when bodily injury or property damage, happen via a sudden accidental loss or certain repeated exposure, in essence. And so we like to say briefly, like when metal or composite materials get bent. And so an occurrence has to happen in order for coverage to respond. Now, what that means is that there's certain things that aren't covered. And for turbine engines, one big potential exposure that really is not directly insurable is issues relating to over-temping the engine, allowing the engine temperatures to get hot, because ultimately that is a mechanical issue and not covered by insurance. And so that's an important thing to know, given the value of aircraft engines, is that that's not something covered by your aircraft insurance policy. There is one company that offers that to be bought out of the policy. It's pretty expensive, and it is just one company who does it. But Otherwise, all aircraft insurance policies are going to exclude that over-temping or anything maintenance related. Mechanical insurance policy is based on an occurrence, bodily injury or property damage to others, or the aircraft-specific damage that is not mechanical related. So over-temping, temperature-related losses to the engines aren't covered. On a similar note, there's an exposure for foreign object damage. There were some insurance companies some time ago that would exclude coverage for foreign object damage, but today, most insurance policies for aircraft do include foreign object damage if the damage was created outside of that engine. We regularly see FOD, or foreign object damage, occur as a result of the breaking down of internal parts, and that is not covered by an aircraft insurance policy. So if the damage is covered by a blade or some other internal part to the engine, that foreign object damage is not covered. Fortunately, many aircraft owners have, an engine plan that will pick up some of this coverage, but just know that since aircraft insurance policies don't cover mechanical type losses, the only foreign object damage or FOD damage it will cover is from external sources. The engine sucked in, a bird or something that was on the ground while being run up. Those third parties are typically covered under the aircraft insurance policy, but not things from internal ingestion. So that's something very specific to turbine aircraft that is important to know because it can be a significant exposure, and you definitely want to have assets available to cover those costs should it occur, or your engine maintenance plan that can address those type of losses. So we've got the mechanical type issues that are also a big important consideration to keep in mind and to know and be aware of when insuring turbine aircraft. Now, there's another topic I've touched on a little bit, and it really applies to older turbine aircraft, 15, 20 years and older. And this is becoming a bigger issue in the last couple of years in the aviation insurance market. And at the end of the day, the bottom line is that fewer insurers have an interest in writing older turbine aircraft that are new to them. So, and again, 20 years, 25 years is definitely older for most insurance companies. Some, it's even newer or more late date. But, and here's the reasons, right? So they have lower hull values, so they cost less to insure. So in the event of a total loss, the insurance company will be writing a lower or a smaller check amount for that total loss. But so many losses in aircraft insurance are partial losses, and older turbine aircraft cost every bit the same amount, if not more in some cases, to repair than do newer aircraft. And newer aircraft are higher values, so they're collecting more premium. And so some insurance companies just said, if we don't already write it, we don't want to write any older turbine aircraft. The other issue is with some models, some make and models, there can be parts availability concerns. So that rules those out with certain insurance companies. The good news is there are, we have a wide aviation insurance market, and there are several companies who are happy to insure older turbine aircraft, but it's typically at a little bit higher rate for the insurance coverage. So it can be covered. That's the challenges with it. When you're looking to buy an aircraft, that's a factor from an insurance perspective, but that is a specific challenge or issue when insuring turbine aircraft. Turbine aircraft typically have higher values. They perform more, so pilot requirements, minimum pilot requirements for a pilot to be insured, training requirements, where these aircraft operate, some specific coverages they need are extremely important when insuring turbine aircraft. And then just know that it covers those bodily injury and property damage, first-party property damage to the aircraft if it is not a mechanical issue. Over-temping, FOD damage from an internal source isn't covered. And then just kind of know the issues when insuring older turbines. They can be done. It may cost more, but those are the factors. Those are the reasons that insurance companies are doing that. And that's the answer to the questions we get so often. Well, that's just a few of the issues I wanted to discuss today. That's all for this episode. Join us again next time as we continue navigating the waypoints in aviation insurance. Till then, enjoy clear skies and unlimited visibility.
Thanks for listening to the Aviation Insurance Podcast. If you found this episode of value, please share it with someone who would benefit from this information. Don't forget to subscribe in your podcast player so you don't miss any new episodes, and to help our show have more impact. This episode is brought to you by Aviation Insurance Solutions, your flight plan for navigating the turbulence of aviation insurance. For more information, visit arisinsurance.com. That is www.aerisinsurance.com. Disclaimer: these episodes are for educational purposes only, and due to the changing regulatory and legal nature of the business, some information may change over time. Having a well-educated and experienced aviation insurance broker on your team is an absolute requirement to success in business and for managing your aircraft and aviation business risks.